Welcome to the Steeplechase, a wacky long-distance event that encompasses 5 hurdle jumps and 1 water barrier. I wanted to see if I, a regular, average person, could learn to steeple over the water barrier. So I traveled to St. Marcellinus to meet Zohair Adnan to see if I could learn how to steeple over the water barrier from a master.
I'm Zohair. I'm a 17-year-old athlete and I've been steepling for the past 7 years. I've been following the LTAD model for my whole life and now I'm the top of the province.
The LTAD model. Stage 1, ages 0 to 6. The LTAD model recommends children being active for more than 60 minutes at a time, except when sleeping. While doing so, children should be exposed to fundamental skills such as running, jumping, twisting, kicking, throwing, and catching. Human motor growth and development. An example of some activities for kids in the toddler to childhood stage are obstacle courses, beanbag throwing, and fun races where children will naturally learn the fundamental skills of running, jumping, twisting, throwing, catching, etc. Next is stage 2, developmental ages 6 to 9. In this stage, LTAD model recommends children to begin to learn agility, balance, and proper coordination and speed. This is during the childhood stage of human development. An age-appropriate activity would be an activity that focuses on more doing and less teaching, such as an agility maze game, where cones are set in a zigzag, and kids are given challenges to run sideways, hop like a frog, or run backwards. Doing this game will improve the children's ABCs in a manner that's fun and engaging. Stage 3, ages 9 to 12, learning to train stage. In this stage, the LTAD model recommends to begin to integrate physical, mental, cognitive, and emotional components and introduce warm-up, cool-down, mobility, nutrition, and mental skills. Because the end of this stage takes place during the start of puberty, where the peak height velocity and critical periods will begin, athletes at this stage should begin their stretching after their cool-down in order to remain flexible and mobile, which will help to perform the steeplechase barrier jump. Some age-appropriate examples for exercises specific for hip mobility during this period, which can be added to the warm-up and cool-down, are leg swings, lunges with a twist, open and close the gate, 90-90 hip rotations, post-pigeon stretches, and the world's greatest stretch. Stage 4, ages 12 to 16, training to train. Here, the LTAD model recommends to develop endurance, strength, and speed, and planned training and competition are introduced at the end with tapering and peak periods. During this stage, athletes must focus on mobility and flexibility as their peak height velocity occurs. Some age-appropriate activities are box step-ups onto a sturdy box. This will increase leg strength and simulate the single leg takeoff used in water jumps. Another drill to improve skill at this stage is implementing core exercises in single leg strength work, such as split squats, single leg hops, planks, Russian twists, and others. Doing these exercises result in a more powerful takeoff and push off the steeple, plus maintaining posture when going over the barrier and regaining balance after the barrier jump. Stage 5, learning to compete. In this stage, the LTAD model recommends event specialization, where athletes are divided into their groups to train with and to further advance their motor skills, such as mid-distance, distance, and sprinting groups. Seasons should also be introduced, and the recommended practice to competition ratio is 90 to 10. Stage 6, 18 to 21. Training to compete in this stage, competition and mental preparation are optimized as the number of athletic training sessions a week increases while participation in other sports ceases. At this stage, athletes may consider themselves full-time athletes. Stage 7, 20 to 23. Learning to win. These athletes are learning to compete when it counts. Tactical, technical, physical, and mental capabilities are maximized. Athletes are prepared psychologically, physiologically, and medically for highest possible results. Stage 8, 23 plus. Winning for a living. Maximizing training, competition, and recovery probably will work with a professional team and ensure excellence at high levels, such as the Olympic Games and World Championships. Stage 9. At any age. Active for life. When an athlete fully withdraws from competitive sport, they adjust to life, but may remain involved through coaching, mentoring, officiating, and administration. They can also make a decision to keep the sport as a hobby or to become master competitors.
First phase of movement is a preliminary movement. This is when you run towards a steeple. In this stage, the interactions that occur is that your glutes push your leg backwards, your hamstrings extend your hip, your quads extend your knee, and your calves contract to push your foot down. Next is a backswing movement. This is when you're jumping and placing one foot onto the steeple. Here, the muscles being used are your quads to contract and lift your leg, your hamstrings contract to place your leg onto the steeple, and your calves plus soleus and quads contract to push off the ground. Next is a force-producing movement. This is when one foot is on the steeple and pushes off the steeple. The muscles being used are your calves, your soleus, and your quads, which contract to push off the steeple. The next phase of movement is a critical instant. This is when your foot is off the steeple and you're airborne. The muscles mentioned before are still being used, as well as your abs and your back, which maintain posture and balance. The final phase of movement is a follow-through. This is when you're in the end of the water pit and you're racing to get back into running position. The muscles being used are the ankle and your lower legs, which are your tips, calves, soleus, which will absorb the shock of impact. If you want to maximize your steeplechase potential, you need to understand and implement the biomechanical theories and concepts related to steeplechase. The first theory/concept is Newton's third law, which is action plus reaction. The action when you're steepling is you're pushing off against the ground, you're pushing off the steeple, you're pushing onto the steeple, and you're hitting the ground. The reaction is the runner leaves the ground, the runner rises up onto the steeple, the runner lifts into the air, and the runner is hitting the ground. Second law is Newton's second law, which is the law of acceleration. To get over the steeple, you need a greater force and also to keep the same speed afterwards. This means that when you're approaching the steeple, you need to increase your speed and not slow down. Now, the levers being used are the first one, so class 2, which is the running fulcrum, which are your knees, the effort, which are your quads and glutes, and the load, which is your foot and lower leg. Next class is class 2. The force in this is the gastrocnemius and hamstrings doing the effort. The load is a calf in the lower leg, and the fulcrum is the middle of your leg. Now we have the principles of biomechanics. The first principle is stability. So when you land from the steeple, you're in a crouching position. This is because your center of mass is lower, which increases your stability, making you less likely to fall over. The next one is the second principle, which is you need all your joints to produce maximum force in order to push off the steeple. These are your legs, your ankles, your foot, your hamstrings, and your arms/hands. Third principle is principle 3. So to get max velocity, you need to use your joints from largest to smallest. The order is your hip, your knee, your ankle, and then your toe during push-off. The next principle is principle 4. The greater the impulse of the barrier, the more forward you're going to move, which means you're going to land less into the water, you're going to lose less energy during the movement. The principle is principle 5. To run straight, you need to push off the ground backwards. The next one is to jump off. You need to push off the ground with one leg and your other will drive up. The next one is to go forward on the steeple. You need to push backwards on the steeple, but not on top of it because you want to go horizontally and not vertically. In addition to principle 4 and 5, running is a linear motion even though there are angular motions occurring. Now we are going to use a 5-step approach to effective KP feedback to provide Cameron with feedback on his skill. So the first step is to observe the skill. Now in analyzing the phases of movements, in the preliminary movement, Cameron slows down when approaching the steeple. Cameron jumps towards the steeple, his bound isn't high enough. He also uses the wrong arm when arriving at the steeple. In the backswing movement, he uses the heel of his foot rather than the midsole. During a critical instant, when Cameron is airborne, he is much higher than the steeple. Now for the mechanics in play, we know that impulse equals force multiplied by time. Next, when stepping on the barrier, you want to travel in a projectile motion, like a parabola, because you want to minimize your time in the air. That means we need to travel horizontal, not vertically, and to do so, we need an impulse that will make us travel horizontal. For landings, we want one foot to land, and then the other foot absorbs the shock to our bent knees, where we have more balance. Finally, when you have one leg on the barrier and one in the air, pushing off, this normally can cause torque. So to minimize this, we need proper arm movement, which is opposite arm to leg, to balance out the torque. We also know that the external forces working upon us during the movement are gravity, air resistance, water resistance, friction, and the ground reaction force when you land. For the errors being selected, they were hinted before, but number 1 is that Cameron is slowing down when approaching the steeple. This is causing a loss of momentum, which means he has to re-accelerate / use more force and energy to steeple over the barrier. His second mistake is that he's placing his heels on the steeple. This is causing for less stability, which can cause him to slip, and also he has a loss of power. The third one is that he is not bounding high enough when approaching the steeple. This is a risk in case because he may trip over the steeple and fall flat into the water. The fourth mistake is that Cameron is not using his opposite arm to leg when approaching the steeple, and this is causing for less lift for jumping upwards and makes his jump more wobbly, and he has a slow recovery after the jump. And the final mistake is that Cameron is not bounding horizontally after the barrier. This will cause him to land in the water pit, which will create more water resistance. For Cameron's psychological barrier of approaching the steeple, we can practice steepling over the grass to break down steps for him. So we can do it by just going over the grass and practice steepling. For Cameron not placing his midfoot on the steeple, he can practice putting his foot on a steeple using a lower barrier, just simply by stepping up with his midfoot and raising. Doing this will help reinforce the skill. For Cameron not bounding far enough, he can do bounding drills such as these, which help him keep his foot in dorsiflexion and also practice going far rather than high. Now for Cameron not using his right arms during the steeple, he can practice doing a wall drill where he extends his leg as if he's doing a steeple, such as this, and bringing his other arm to the opposite leg. Doing this for both legs will help reinforce the arm movement.